Did Eric tell you about our first practice space?
No.
Oh, yeah, this is good. Our first practice. So Mike Sangster's dad. Um, I'm not sure if he was a part owner, if he was just a manager at a rental place. So just they rented lawnmowers and chainsaws and whatever. It was called Suburban Rental,
Yeah.
and he gave. We didn't have a place to practice right with drums, and Mike's dad gave him the keys and said, "Just go. You can use the store because we're closed at night." So we would just drive over to Suburban Rental, flip on the lights, lug all our gear in, and we would just set up kind of in the entryway where you walked in, you know, uh, right there with amongst all the chainsaws and that's where we practiced for like the first 6 months of the band probably. And there's a song about it. I'm not sure is it I'm not sure if it ever got put up on Bandcamp. We made a boombox recording of it where we all switched instruments and we played a hardcore song called Suburban Rental.
Oh.
I played drums, Eric switched to guitar, Mike played bass, and Joe sang. And it was like we just did a hardcore song uh, with the slow breakdown in the middle.
You gotta have that.
Just we did a paint by numbers hardcore song for a joke. We would do that for an encore sometimes in that first year. God, it's not very funny to maybe anybody but me, but I have this really distinct memory when we were recording Poison for Profit in the studio. We were listening to a playback of Egad, and there was a cowboy hat on the wall. And Joe took off this cowboy hat and he had it on kind of askew, and he started playing air guitar, mimicking my licks with this like wiggling around with this cowboy hat. And it was just hilarious. It had to, but I don't know if that sort of thing translates, but that's one of those really, God, memory is so weird. It's so random what you remember and what you forget.
The Hollowmen didn't have a tour in the way that kind of the typical thought of we climb in a van and we spend 3 or 4 weeks on the road kind of thing. We did later on, but at that stage in our life, we didn't. I mean, I think a couple of us were washing dishes to make ends meet. I was working at a record store. Joe was in high school. I don't even know if he still had, or if he had a job at that time. But the point being that none of us really were capable of taking weeks off at a time to go tours. So we'd end up typically playing a couple shows here, a couple shows there. We'd drive to a venue and drive back the same day. I can remember very vividly going to Cedar Falls and driving back home that same night. We'd pile into the van and we'd stop at Quick Trip, and we'd almost always get microwave burritos, which I'm not sure that I want to describe or say how we would think of them or how I would refer to them. But at the time, they had limited options that you could eat, and I've been a vegetarian for a long time, and I was a vegetarian back then, and they did have this bean and cheese burrito, and in order to give it any real flavor, I would put ketchup on it so that it had some kind of, so I'd grab a handful of ketchup packets and eat that on the way home from Cedar Falls back to Des Moines. I do remember a time driving up to Cedar Falls. We stopped in this small town, and I can't remember which one it was, and I think we were at a Casey's. And Joe at that time, Joe always had a little more flair to him than the rest of us did. So Joe had a little more attitude with his haircut, and Joe had earrings, and I think he had 7 earrings at one point in his ear. And we were in this Casey's, and this kind of Iowa trucker type dude comes up to Joe, and he looks at him, he goes, "You slam dance boy?" And it was like, what? Like, it was such a strange, like, how do you even know what slam dancing is?
That sounds like Albion, Iowa.
It probably was.
Yep.
I mean, it who knows? But we just always thought that was really humorous that in the middle of nowhere, somebody would have that knowledge about something, be able to pick up on Joe's look and make that comment. I mean, I have a lot of fond memories of that time. Everything was fresh and new, and every time we went to go play a show, it was an opportunity to do the thing that we loved. I mean, one of the things that we would do back then is not only were we in a band together, but we were friends. And so we were together virtually every day. And I mean, there were times where at one point, Joe and I lived right across the street from each other. We practiced in the basement of the house that I lived in. And Joe and I also worked at the same business. So this was a little later on, this little post Poison for Profit, but that's just the kind of connection that we had. So I have a lot of just fond memories of just being friends, of just hanging out, of just going to restaurants, going to one of Dave's favorite restaurants, Boswell's, for breakfast.
Do a whole episode on that.
Yeah, I mean, Boswell's is the sort of place you would walk in there and you would have to have a deck of cards to keep yourself entertained, because it would be an hour or more before you got your food every single time.
Well, the hash browns
to make
it's big, you know.
The hash browns were humongous. They also served beer. So you could go in there in the morning and you could just start drinking with breakfast. And not that we did that all the time, but I mean, that was the kind of crazy environment that we'd go to, or we'd spend our time in. I mean, a lot of that, I feel like I'm just referring to stuff that Dave knows. A lot of time is spent with your band members in the van, driving from point to point, sitting around waiting to sound check, sitting around waiting to play, sitting around waiting to get paid.
Yeah.
And then, then finding a place to spend the nights and then starting all over the next day. And that's really the type of memories that I have with those guys. There are a number of specific things that I can think of. It was just the camaraderie and the friendship, and it was wonderful.
The Hollowmen.
Well, the thing that always strikes me now that I'm an old fart is how young we were. Joe especially, right? 15 years old, good Lord. I was 20 years old, and in 2.5 years, my stint with the Hollowmen was over. And by the way, I decided to go on to law school. Stupid decision. But nonetheless, that's what caused me to leave the band. And Jim Roth, the most talented guy I've ever played with, to replace me on bass. So the band didn't lose anything, it actually gained quite a bit with Jim Roth on bass. But I still marvel at how young we were, how immature we were chronologically, but how we got a lot accomplished in those 2.5 years when I was with the band. And then the other 18 months or so when after Jim had replaced me. When we had our reunion show a couple of years ago, it was emotional, like I'm sure all reunion shows are. But what really hit me was that, wow, I wasn't just in a band with these guys. They were my best friends for 3 or 4 years of my life. We hung out all the time. We drove around the Midwest. We played shows. They were my best friends, and I really realized, wow, how much of a part of my life that was. Although it was condensed into just a few years. But for stories of the band, and this may be true for every band, but a lot of them are transportation related, right? For example, when we recorded our first record, we had no money. We borrowed money from Tim Johnson, a great guy from Des Moines. He lent us, I don't know, $800 to go record it. And I borrowed my mom's Dodge Aspen station wagon. It's not a big one, it's a small station wagon. We all crammed in there with our equipment, drove to Schaumburg, Illinois, tracked all 11 songs on the first day. And we had no money, so we slept in the station wagon in the parking lot of the studio. And it was a really bad decision because Joe is like 6'3", Mike's 6 foot, Tom and I are not little guys. And it was the worst night of sleep ever. I remember Joe was in pain the next morning. And the joke was for us is that the next morning, Michael Freeman, the producer, and Rick Menck, who helped produce it and engineer, drove up and they saw us in the station wagon, like, what are you guys doing here? We said, oh, we slept in my mom's car. And so you could have stayed at our house. We didn't even think to ask them, do you mind putting us up for the night? I think we were just too embarrassed. The other car related thing, if you guys don't mind, I'll share related to Chicago, another Chicago story. Because again, it was hard to get to Chicago when we didn't have reliable transportation, but we played a show with, we were supposed to play a show with a great band called Squirrel Bait and a band from New York called Das Dam. And this would have been June of 1986. We had no working car. So I hooked up a U-Haul trailer to my 1972 Monte Carlo. Awesome car. I wish I still had it. We drove with the U-Haul full of our equipment to play the show. The lead singer for Squirrel Bait had apparently cut his foot in a lawn, mowing his parents' yard lawn. So the Squirrel Bait didn't show up. But fortunately for us, Big Black did. Steve Albini and Big Black played that night. One of the best shows I've ever seen in my life. This is right when their band their album Atomizer had just come out. Amazing show. After the show, we were loading up the U-Haul trailer in my Monte Carlo, and Steve Albini came out, and I think he felt sorry for us. He said, you guys, because we were going to just drive on back to Des Moines. And he said, you know what, just stay with me overnight. So he put us up in his apartment. This would have been, again, 1986, when Big Black was still going strong. And it took us out to breakfast the next day. And I literally think he just felt sad for us. You know, just driving that old muscle car with a U-Haul attached to it. The final part of the story is, as we're driving back to Des Moines, we're smelling the smell of rotten eggs. And at the time, we accused Joe Page of having some rotten potato salad that he must have left somewhere in my car. And we're like, you know, Joe, God damn it, where's that smell coming from? Well, it turned out it was the battery in my car was about ready to blow up because it was pulling that trailer, and you know, in a way it never was intended to. And long story short, we pulled over and the battery was bulging like this. It was about ready to explode. And we're all looking at it, you know, with the hood open, and it probably would have splashed acid all over us. But so after charging up a $300 car repair and tow on my mom's Amico credit card, we finally got home, you know, later on that day. So if only we had good quality transportation, all these stories would have been so much better.
You know, it doesn't really matter if you're great guys or not. It's the music. But I want to say that from the moment I met the Hollowmen, all four of you were so supportive of me. And I imagine that's what Steve Albini felt too, that you probably weren't going to rob him and kill him in his apartment. And I hope you guys know that you were just very open and supporting of other musicians and people. And that's not always the way it is. So, you know, and that's, like I said, it doesn't have a rat's ass to do with the tape at the end of the day, what's on there. But it's important to me that you know that, because it was just a great experience hanging out with you guys. And, you know, I'm not saying like Ralph and I trying to do this tape is, you know, paying back the Hollowmen, but it certainly is a part of that for me. It, you know, you guys were good people making fucking great music. And I see this as kind of the end of the cycle. So when you tell these stories, I think it's not, you know, there's a reason you kind of stayed alive. Because you were good, honest, you know, you were really, your hearts were on your sleeves. And more. So I just, you know, for somebody who was at the show and was hanging out with you guys at that time, I really appreciate your presence. It was important.
Yeah, no, it's awesome to hear that.